Um, you didn't ask about my socks.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I feel
No,
terrible. No, you got
no.
to show us your
It
socks. Matt wears awesome socks, so
are
he's got
the
to show
socks.
them.
Is it normally recorded where I show socks, or do we leave that part off the recording?
Well, it's going to be recorded today unless you make me turn this off.
No, I'm not gonna make you turn it off. It just is gonna be a little bit funny that the video starts out that way. No,
Well,
like
let's see him anyway.
I was actually just talking to Kim, who does it every other week from me, and
Yeah,
I said to her, I was like, "Hey, do you ever like worry that you're wearing the same shirt too many times? Like things that nobody else is gonna care about,
right.
right? And nobody else ever even notices, most likely. I don't know. Those of you who are here participating, you can tell me if you notice my shirt. But so it's like the same thing with my socks, you know? So no, my socks today are astronauts.
Oh, cool.
So they're astronauts with stars around them. So I have no idea if there's any specific symbolism there other than we got astronauts. So you're always usually excited about my socks. So I think I'm
I completely spaced out. You know, I'm distracted. And speaking of astronauts, sorry, buddy. Sorry, everybody. We'll start in a minute. I swear. I just checked out my Facebook page, and one of my friends had posted this really funny video of like a 3 or 4 year old girl singing this song that she made up herself, and it was, "I wonder what's in your butthole." It could be astronauts, it could be aliens. And somebody had like put background music and like jazzed it up, and it was just, you know, it's in my head, and I am very distracted by
kids
little
kids
girls.
are amazing, and what
Yeah,
kids come up with, that has been the funnest part I think about having kids is I'm like I mean I won't even repeat it, but something, my son and I were on a mountain biking ride yesterday with some of my nephews, so his cousins, and my son said something out loud and I went, huh, that's really interesting that you're saying this out loud to everybody. And I actually said, I'm glad you're willing to talk about anything in front of me and your cousins, because that's the type of relationship we want to have here,
yeah,
where you are not afraid. So that's really good. Okay, so
yeah. Let's get to business.
well, I mean that kind of being not being afraid to talk about everything, I think is actually pretty important. And in fact, it touches on what I wanted to talk a little bit about here, kind of leading into our conversation, trying to move my windows around. And so I've spent some time just trying to figure out what do I want to share before we get into questions and answers. And please start throwing out questions even now, because the questions don't need to be related to what I'm teaching. But I started thinking about um, what I see a lot, and I think I've talked about this before, but how much lying damages relationships. And I've talked about how lying can actually hurt a relationship more than infidelity or some other grievance in the relationship. And a lot of people, like people who have experienced dishonesty in a relationship, usually know what I'm talking about, because when you break that foundational core need for trust in a relationship, then it is really hard to have a relationship. So I started thinking about, obviously authenticity and vulnerability is really important in order to, or is a must in order to rebuild relationships. And specifically, when if I'm sharing something that is truthful for me, but I'm also ashamed of it, and I'm sharing with you my shame, and I'm asking you to hold that with me, um, that can do a lot to really rebuild a relationship. Now, obviously, we don't want to overshare. We don't want to share with people who aren't worthy of hearing it. But I'm thinking in the relationships of our spouses, and if there's been betrayal in our relationship from both. So if we have betrayal from somebody who struggles with addiction, regardless of what kind of addiction it is, and you have a partner who unfortunately didn't realize they were getting into a relationship where this is an issue, then sharing shameful things from both parties, sharing our shame as it becomes safe and healthy to do so, does a lot to build connection. Um, and if I have something I'm going to share that I'm really scared is going to hurt you, because a lot of damage is caused in relationships where let's say, for instance, I have something I want to share with you. Maybe I've made a mistake and I'm scared it's going to hurt you. So I'm going to make the decision that I love you so much. I'm just not going to share this. I don't want to hurt you. But then that creates so much damage. So sharing our shame, sharing things that potentially could hurt our partner can be very helpful in rebuilding trust. And what I've found, though, is when I have couples, especially if I have somebody who's early in recovery work, you might ask a question. So let's say there was infidelity, and a partner will often ask questions, something like, did you love somebody that you had an affair with, or whatever? And the person who's struggling with addiction or the affair or whatever might say, yes, I was in love with them. And it's really interesting because as a clinician, I'm sitting there realizing you've got this individual with this fragmented attachment. They're not attached well to their spouse. They're fragmenting their attachment and attaching to an affair partner, or they're fragmenting their attachment and attaching to alcohol or pornography or drugs or whatever. They're fragmenting this need for comfort and safety and peace, and they're putting it all over the place. So when we throw out this idea, when we ask a question like, are you in love? They might say, yes, I'm really in love. Right, to the best that they understand it, with their very fragmented attachment. And it can be extremely painful for a partner. And what I often think in my mind is, yeah, those are the current self-deceptions that you have because you don't know any better, or that's your fantasy thinking. And a lot of us create self-deceptions or fantasy thinking in order to survive, in order to help us manage pain in our lives. But there's this thing that happens as we grow in recovery work. We gain more self-awareness. We gain more knowledge of our past, our history. We gain more knowledge of, it may sound strange, but even our own bodies, that we start to realize, wow, that tightness in my chest is anxiety. The number of people who I've had sitting on my couch and I say, so what brings you to therapy? And they say, well, I don't know. I had my heart racing and I was struggling to breathe. And, I thought I was having a heart attack. And I said, oh, it sounds like a panic attack. Like, it sounds like you had an anxiety attack. And they're like, no, I don't have anxiety. And I sit there and I think, okay, that's interesting, right? What's going on that this person doesn't want to consider, right? They've got so many signs that point to an anxiety attack or a panic attack, and they don't want to consider what the truth is, right? And for lots of reasons, we all create self-deception or fantasy thinking. And as we are patient, and if you're struggling with addiction, or you're a partner of somebody who's struggling, you are both patiently trying to work through the healing process, and bless you for doing it. There are so many wonderful rewards, but we have to recognize there are times where we just have to sit and go, that is quite the delusional fantasy you have going on. And I'm going to wait until you get the growth you need. And I might ask this question again and see where you are, because we can look back and go, yeah, I didn't know any other way to think about that. And I know my answer hurt you. And now I'm starting to realize that wasn't love. That wasn't attachment. That was a fantasy in and of itself. I wanted that to be love. So we can obviously take this wherever you guys want to go in the questions today. But it really left me thinking about the amount of patience, the amount of trust, and calmness that needs to be there as we are working through addiction and repair within a relationship, because of the self-deceptions and the fantasy thinking that we create in the relationship. So I'll open it up. Scott, you've always got great commentary and questions, so go
Thank
from
you.
here.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Everybody, ask questions using the Q&A feature. Just type them in, and we'll get to them as quick as we can. We've got one in there already, but I wanted to ask you, Matt, you hit on something. You said, I forget how you worded it, but basically you said affairs are fantasy based. You know, they're
Well,
a fantasy of what you want it to be. And I wanted to kind of emphasize that point and maybe have you expand on it a little bit. Like affairs are not, you don't take out the trash for your affair partner.
well, yes. Like I remember having somebody explain it. Like, you know, I remember somebody telling me one time when I was a teenager, because I had a girlfriend and to the best of my ability, I was in love with her, right? And I remember somebody telling me, you don't know what love is. Now, at the time, that was hurtful. In fact, I don't suggest saying that. It is hurtful. The problem is there's a lot of life ahead, and I remember somebody saying, you know, you're not listening to Brahms and Beethoven together, you're not eating breakfast together, right? You're not worrying about finances together, right? So with that same understanding, you know, an affair, if there is any sense of sneaking around, if there's any sense of secrecy and hiding from your spouse, right? And if you're not fully committed and living a life fully integrated with this other person, then there is a fantasy, right? Like it is a fantasy because there's secrecy, hiding, deception, and you're not integrating everything. And so it's this fantasy thinking. If you think, right, if you can own it and just be like, oh yeah, I'm totally unhealthy and I'm numbing my life out and I'm using this other person and they're using me, right? We are both using each other to try and get our needs met, right? Then it's like, okay, we can at least accept that you understand the unhealthy nature of this, because then it's like, well, you recognize the fantasy that you're engaging in, right? That's a higher level of healthiness. But yes, it's a total fantasy because you're not living the committed relationship that you've committed to your spouse and now are off. Yeah.
Yeah, the affair always seems perfect, and I'm always thinking, yeah, because you don't have to fight about money. You don't have to do his laundry or clean up after him, and she doesn't. You don't have. It's just all that stuff, and almost every time somebody who was having an affair and thought they were in love, in my experience, the people I know who left the spouse and went to the affair partner and got married regretted it. And
Yeah.
the relationship was done in 6 months or less.
You know,
Because they had to have reality.
I have heard different statistics. I don't know what's currently accurate. I have heard statistics. The best case scenario that I've ever heard for affairs partners working out, if they leave their spouse and get married to their affair partner, the best case scenario that statistically that I've ever heard is that you have 25% chance that it'll work out. But the more common number I've heard is that it's like 98.2% chance of it failing, right? Like, and the thing about an affair, and because you just said something that reminded me, you can't pick and choose intimacy. You can't pick and choose vulnerability. But an affair, you pick and choose. You pick and choose when you're going to spend time together to some degree. You pick and choose the fantasy pieces that you like and enjoy, and then you leave all the other garbage. I don't have to worry and fight about finances with you. I don't have to fight about, maybe how many kids we want to have, or things we want to spend money on, or whose family we're going to spend the holidays with. Right. So you pick and choose, and guess what? Intimate relationships don't work when you pick and choose. If you're going to have a truly intimate relationship, and I'm not talking sexually, I'm talking if I'm going to have an intimate relationship with my best guy friend, I have to face all of our difficulties if we're going to have a healthy relationship. I can't pick and choose the intimacy that we're going to have. We have to face it.
Yeah, you know, the affair, you get like the best of it and you don't get any of the day-to-day grind of it. It's just, you know, that's not going to be how it is. Okay, we got a couple questions, so I'm done ranting about
No,
it.
I love it, Scott. You got good insight.
Yeah, it's just affairs are like, really? You think this is going to work? Okay.
The
Can you
problem
speak?
is, you think about that. They think it's going to work because it feels better living in a fantasy, right? Like we don't. It's funny. You can't rationally talk to somebody who lives in a fantasy. Logic doesn't work, and so it takes a lot of work to get in there and start to expose pieces of it, right? They just feel lectured. They blow it off. Oh, you don't get it. You don't understand me. So I've found that it's just such a slow and patient process, and you can get it unfolded. It just takes time. It's ugly.
And sex and porn and love addicts, by the way, we live in fantasy. I mean, that's the whole thing. Those addictions are fantasy addictions.
Oh my goodness.
And you know, trying to get a sex addict like me back into the truth of life is not so easy. So I applaud Matt and people like Matt who do the work and help people like me. Okay, so can you speak to couples about regaining? Can you speak to the topic of couples regaining trust? I just left my husband on Wednesday because of his sex addiction. He's so very passive and doesn't think he has any work to do. I will be working with the therapist in a support group. Can you say anything that might help me today? I'm not feeling very sure of what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, I bet. Boy, you are right in the thick of a lot of trauma and a lot of uncertainty. Um, so I think what I was speaking to really reaches to this, that you have somebody who's very passive and doesn't think that he has any work to do. And that's somebody potentially who really is living in the fantasy and hasn't started to face the reality of what life looks like beyond, I mean, you say beyond his sex addiction. I love that you're working, or you say you will be working with a therapist in a support group. So when you say you left him, um, usually I encourage people. I'm encouraging you, trust your gut. It's really important that you do that. If you felt you needed to leave, then trust that instinct. I always encourage you to work with a therapist. We typically do. I don't encourage people do a therapeutic separation without the therapy part, because a separation, a therapeutic separation, the purpose is for us to get the space that we need and work on ourselves individually. And while I work on myself and I get the stability I need, and you work on yourself and you get the stability you need, we slowly start integrating connection back into the relationship. So perhaps we have a therapeutic separation. You each are living in different places, and you still have I mean, you're going to need to talk to your therapist, because I'm just speaking in generalities here, but I might encourage a couple to, okay, I want you to go on a date that, this first week, and I want you to not talk about recovery work at all. Just try and do something reasonably fun together, even if you just eat dinner and go to a movie, which obviously not a whole lot of movie watching right now, but like try and just do something together. And then over time have like your dating more connecting, so that you are playing games together, board games or whatever it might be, putting a puzzle together. As silly as that might sound, it's just spending time in each other's presence. As far as but over time, you also, if you're doing a separation, and I'm not quite sure if that's what you're doing or not, or if you've left him and you're planning on moving forward in a different direction in your life, but over time, you want to set out early. What is the financial plan? How are we working on that? If you have kids, how are we dealing with kid time? One of the things that I hate in doing a therapeutic separation, oftentimes the partner, and I'm going to go stereotypical here, a woman might ask, or he might take the therapeutic separation and move out, well, then she's left with the burden of taking care of kids and working her career, and it's like suddenly this therapeutic separation is actually more painful for her, and he's kind of having, I hate to say it this way, a little bit of a vacation, right? Like he's kind of off on, doing his own thing. So you want to make sure that you are separating duties out, so that you both are getting the time you need to connect with friends and do your therapy and everything else. And honestly, as far as saying something I can help you today, man, let me tell you, that prayer is in my heart as well. I will encourage you, reach out and get as much support as you can, people you trust. Right now, because of the uncertainty of where you're at in the marriage, I would encourage you to try and find people who are going to love him no matter what he has struggled with, no matter how much he has hurt you. I think it's important that you reach out to people who have the potential to have a forgiving heart, because you fell in love with him to begin with, most likely. And so you want them to be able to love him as well. Sometimes we might join up with other people who are also hurting, and we have to be careful there, because if we get together and start to engage in what is often referred to as common enemy intimacy, where we suddenly have intimacy with each other because we have a common enemy, and that is, in your case, these jerk husbands who treated us terrible, and there is a lot of truth there. Like if he's active in a sex addiction, he didn't treat you right at all. But so you want to find people who are able to support you and eventually him and forgive him. So regardless of where you go on your journey, it really sounds like you're headed in the right direction. You're meeting with a therapist, you're getting connected to a support group, you're on a webinar asking questions. You're the first one to jump in. So it really sounds like to me, you're right, you're in the right direction. So hopefully that helps you.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer, Matt. Particularly talking about with therapeutic separation, things like separation of duties and responsibilities, with the house and the kids and stuff. I think, when somebody just storms out, that doesnn't happen. This is one of the reasons we need a therapist to guide us sometimes. Is to say, okay, you're so angry you can't be in the house together. That's fine. Let's talk about how that's going to work. And, so I'm glad you pointed that out. And then, yeah.
There are such things as what we call in-home separations, and for many of my couples that can work as well. And it's basically, you go live in this room, I'll live in that room, and then we have a lot of boundaries. Sometimes it's, hey, here's when I won't be home, and here's when you're going to be home with the kids. And when we're home, for the first 4 weeks, we're not going to have any conversations about addiction, or right. And but you've got to work with a therapist to try and really figure out what your needs are there. Right now, somebody in your situation, you're in so much pain, it's hard to think clearly. Pain distorts our ability to think and make maybe the healthiest decisions. So please get support so you can work through that. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit on also the possibility of an in-home separation.
Yeah, and the other point I wanted to make, you just left on Wednesday, just because, it's so painful right now that you really can't be in the same house, doesn't mean that the relationship cannot heal. That's not a permanent thing. It might be a permanent thing, but it might not be. If it's not going to be permanent, both parties have to try to recover and heal. And right now it sounds like you are, and maybe he's not so much, or at least not to your satisfaction.
Another one, I'm going to jump in with another piece. Another thing that I see is that a partner who's been betrayed sometimes will draw a line in the sand and say, if you ever do this again, then you have to move out. Or, if you ever go drinking again, then You know, you have to move into the other room or sleep on the couch. And what's interesting is that from today's perspective, I'm trying to set a boundary for what my need is. Well, when that thing, if it happens, I suddenly go, oh crud, what if that's not my need right now? But I said that this is what had to happen. I better enforce it. The hard part is a boundary, a real healthy boundary is based on your need in the moment. So you've got to be flexible and give yourself grace. If your need changes, then trust that instinct and let it change, and actually have a conversation about, look, I know I said this, and I'm not sure that that's actually what my need is right now, which is why if you've got a good support system, you make some phone calls and you have them check you and go, hey, I always said that this would be what has to happen if this ever happened again, but I'm not feeling that right now. Can you guys walk me through this? Can you work me over on these thoughts here? So just, yeah, you just left on Wednesday. And if you said, you know, I'm not going to talk to you for a week. Okay. If that's what you need, don't talk for a week. But if it changes and you say, you know what, I do want to talk and I have something specific I want to talk about, then trust your instinct there. So hopefully that helps some more.
Yeah, great point. I know telling the truth and being open and vulnerable rebuilds trust, but how do you overcome the fear of doing that and the projection that the betrayed partner will be triggered and be stuck in past trauma, causing more shame and pain for me and also for the betrayed partner? So yeah, how do you become open and vulnerable when you're afraid of doing it for some legitimate reasons?
Yeah, so that's what is often referred to as you've got to actually slice that thinner. The single most important thing you said in that statement or question was, how do I overcome the fear of doing that? And it's take that to your partner. Hey, I'm realizing there's a lot that you deserve to hear from me. And I'm really struggling with all the fear of triggering you and or escalating your emotions or hurting you again. And I want you to know that I know I need to come forward with this and you deserve to hear it. And right now, the most vulnerable I know how to be is to tell you that and own my fear. So it may sound a little bit funny, but that's actually a very vulnerable and open thing to say. Most people, if they feel that fear, if you're anything like me, you feel that fear and you don't say a thing. You just keep it tight, shove it down, you know, don't talk. Now, other people handle fear differently, but I often have a fear response. And if that's the case for you, then the key is to actually start talking about the fear, and then over time, as soon as possible, say, hey, I have a fear. I don't want to hurt you and bring up the trauma. And that's the other thing. Your partner might say, I really hope you do. Please bring it up, because if my trauma gets triggered, if it gets escalated, I need to learn to work through that. And to be honest, you need to learn to hear that from your partner. Now, you will, and I love that you owned it in the question. You said the past trauma I have caused. It's so awesome. You're owning it, and own it in the moment. Speak to that. You know, I know you're hurt. It's because all the trauma I've caused. And then you can also say, and I'm struggling to hear you're hurt because now I've got a lot of shame and pain coming up in me. And even if you return with that, you know what? You deserve to have me hear you. And last night when I opened up to you and your trauma got triggered, my fear and pain and shame came up and I didn't hear you. Can we try to revisit it again right now? And that's one of the best things you can do, is just keep going back. Keep telling your partner, can we try it right now? But I'm telling you, I can feel the fear that you're in your question about how badly you want to show up for your partner and how much you've hurt them and how much pain comes up for you. Go have that conversation with your partner. I think that's a golden just the insight in that question is fantastic.
Yeah. But what happens when this individual responds exactly the way you said, and I'm the betrayed partner, and I say, well, that's nice. What is it that you're afraid of telling me? I need to know right now. Because that's going to happen sometimes.
No, for sure. And I would, to be honest, I would say, do you know what's funny? I've actually said to my clients, just say, hey, my therapist, or this guy who's a therapist on the internet, he says that the most important thing to do is talk about fear. I wonder if when you ask me what's going on right now, if this is your trauma coming up because you think I'm keeping secrets from you, right? Because you know what? I have kept so many secrets from you. I don't blame you for being scared about what's coming up, like that I'm holding some secret from you. But I've got all sorts of things that aren't necessarily secrets, that I've betrayed you, that I've hurt you, that I need to share with you, that I'm worried are going to trigger your pain, right? There's lots of things that are going to trigger your partner's pain. But so I don't know, Scott, if that answered it.
Yeah, I mean, kind of. I mean, I was thinking about, kind of what we do with disclosure sometimes, which is say, I know you want disclosure yesterday, but it's going to happen on June the 4th because your partner is not going to be fully ready to disclose to you until June the 4th. If maybe you could say, you know what,
Yeah.
I just can't do it right now. How about tomorrow at dinner?
Well, yeah. And here's the hard part, like if you have what's like a formal disclosure coming up as part of the therapeutic process, I've seen a lot of people who you have an escalated partner and they're asking a bunch of questions, and the escalated partner is saying, you got to tell me right now. Well, if you've got a formal disclosure coming up, most likely the partner who's been traumatized, they've been told, hey, all of the questions you need to ask, submit to me as your therapist, and let's figure out what's healthy to ask. The tough part is that you're in a really tough position as the person who's betrayed them. You can't say, well, that's not a healthy question, right? What you need to say is, you know what, your question is valid and I want to answer it. And I'd like to work with my therapist to figure out within myself what is even a healthy answer, because I'm not sure I have the answer to that. And you deserve to hear an answer right now, but I don't feel comfortable giving it. And I know that must feel painful to hear from me. And it must feel like I'm keeping secrets, but I want to do a disclosure properly. Right?
Yeah, I want to read the comment that we just got from this questioner. Thank you for that. That answers my question perfectly. Both my wife and I are listening. She knows I asked that question, so helpful to us both. I think that is awesome.
That's fantastic.
I love that you asked that question on a webinar when she's there. That kicks butt.
Oh, that is fantastic.
Yeah. Let's see. Hey, Matt, you're the best. My partner and I are getting back together again, and I see a change in his behavior and that he is willing. He doesn't have good communication skills yet, but he's trying. For years, I was afraid to ask questions. He lacked empathy and lashed out.
Oh, yeah.
Now, if I want to ask something and want to know anything, I still feel afraid and feel a heavy stone in my stomach. This is from the past, and we are starting anew. He is answering my questions, but there isn't a lot of support or validating yet. Any suggestions for me on how to handle this? Thank you.
You know, the coolest part is, I think the best way for you to handle it is what you wrote in your question. And that is, you said, now if I ask him something or want to know anything, I still feel afraid and feel a heavy stone in my stomach. And what I would say is exactly that. I want to be close to you and I want to ask you a question, but I'm afraid and I feel like this heavy stone in my stomach. Now I would expand a little bit on that. I feel a heavy stone in my stomach because I'm worried you might dismiss my fear, or you might get upset by my question, or you might not be empathetic, right? Because this right here is a perfect example of slicing it thinner, and you're actually handing your partner, if he's healthy, he's hearing you give him the answer, which is, I need you to be empathetic and I need you to be here for me. And he, if he's listening to this, you can say, oh my goodness, I am so sorry you're feeling a heavy stone in your stomach. I don't blame you. We've been through a lot, and I have been learning and struggling a long time. And so please, share with me your pain, and I'm going to do my best to hear it. So, and does that mean he's not gonna get mad or hurt or upset? No. But another fairly unpopular thing that I share with people is that attachment in a relationship is born in the repair of conflict. So as you guys learn to face these fears and carefully take to your partner this fear that you have in an attempt to repair the conflict, you are going to create so many opportunities for attachment. Are some of those going to fail? Yeah, they're going to fail. Your partner's going to blow it, right? They're not good at this attachment stuff. I don't know. Sometimes even as a betrayed partner, we struggle with attachment stuff, right? We've all got our struggles, but the way you said it in the question is just perfect. So if you have any other questions on it, ask me, but that would be my summarization. It was perfect.
Yeah, I love that. This is the kind of the flip side of the question that we answered right before this, where the answer is just tell the truth. This is what I'm feeling. Vulnerability and honesty are the ways to rebuild trust and intimacy.
Absolutely.
That's what you're preaching here. And how boring would a relationship be if there was never any conflict?
Well, to be honest, though, think if you've got somebody struggling with addiction, and even people who aren't, the number of people who think a happy life is no conflict. Yeah. And I think I used to think that, oh man, I look forward to the day when my wife and I no longer have any conflicts. But the truth is, I realized how sad that is. The day when my wife and I aren't growing together, figuring out ways to connect with each other and experiencing how to support each other and strengthen each other, I'm sorry. Life, like a quote from the Princess Bride movie from so many years ago, life is pain, but also life is love. And in order to have love, there has to be pain, and we have to learn how to attach in those moments of pain.
Yeah, if we don't have the downs, we can't appreciate the ups.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the ups are just normal.
Mm-hmm.
And we get bored. Okay, I'm 74 and my addict wife is 68. It seems that at my age, dealing with this trauma may be different than for younger folks because alternatives seem fewer, such as starting over in a new relationship or moving on.
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, you know what, I would say, yeah, at 74, your wife's 68. I mean, if you're looking at as far as moving on, I mean, there is quite a single scene for that age, and it kind of depends on what you mean by moving on. I mean, if you said in the comment a new relationship, what I would really probably push you to do is, what if you started to look at building new, if you're moving on from the relationship and if that's what you're deciding to do, or even if you're staying in your relationship, what does it look like for you to find new relationships though that are friendship based, right? It's support groups, it's finding community. Some people find that through church, some people find that through hobbies, right? Finding a community where you can connect and start relationships that way, I believe very strongly that, and it's something I don't think I've actually talked about it on here, there is a bit of an epidemic in our culture, in our society, especially Western culture, and maybe even more specifically American culture, that men are lonely, and that men place the burden of their loneliness solely on their wives. And there's, I'm trying to remember, there was an article in Harper's Bazaar, if I remember right. It's called "The Lonely American Man." If I remember right, or the burden.
Yeah, something like that, but it is in Harper's. I've seen it.
The burden that women carry for men because they're lonely, or maybe it was actually, there was also an NPR podcast in I want to say it was in The Hidden Brain, and it's an episode called The Lonely American Man. I think that's that one. And it talks about studies that have been done around men and friendships. Phenomenal podcast, that episode. And so my challenge, I guess I'm making the assumption that as a 74-year-old, you're a male here. That might not be a healthy assumption. But if that is the case, you might really look at getting outside connection here. As far as relationships, yeah, I believe it's doable, but you're right. There is a bit of searching. You're going to need to find places where other single people hang out. But I guess I don't have enough data about your situation and your relationship to speak to it maybe more than that. So I hope that's helpful.
But let's assume for a second that they're trying to save the relationship. The process is going to be the same, like
absolutely.
disclosure. Yeah, it's the same healing process.
And maybe the comment is even wrapped around this idea of I don't have any hope but to stay in my marriage. And the reality of it is, honestly, at your age, I believe that anybody, no matter what age, you can learn, you can grow, and maybe it takes you and her a little more time. But the truth is, start creating right now the life you've always wanted. And that is so hard because you're dealing with so much pain. But I encourage you, start now. If you guys are working on it and making the relationship work, absolutely enjoy all the years you have left, because it could be plenty. And it could be, another 20 years of marriage or more. So make it happen. But is it a lot of work? Sure. Are you feeling hopeless? Maybe. And I'm going to tell you, live the best life you've got, regardless of how old you are. Scott?
No, I think you hit it. I was reading this next question. There's a lot packed into it. It's great stuff. This is from an individual who's been married 40 years. So we're going to assume, maybe not 74 or 68, but getting up there. Sure. Another adult. First discovery of the infidelity was 3 years ago. The husband and she are in separate therapy for 4 years. They're separated 2 years due to his lying and slips.
Yeah.
6 months ago, they agreed to work on coming back together. Then she writes, he refuses to tell me his sobriety date. He refuses to talk about slips and relapses. He will not be transparent with the phone or the laptop. I'm not allowed to talk to his therapist. He refuses to go to a marriage therapist right now. Tells me to stay on my side of the street, and he'll leave if I bring things up. He wants it all in the past. The betrayal, the trauma, the grieving have not been worked on. My needs have not been met to help me feel safe. He listens, but does what he wants. How am I to feel safe under this situation? How can I act normal with him and enjoy time together if there's no trust? I feel he's not committed, willing, or wanting to build any trust. What boundaries should I put in place? I did not think he's in recovery because he's also drinking. My abandonment wounds are poked every day. He is avoidant and I am anxious. This has been acted out over 40 years. So she's petrified, hurt, and sad.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. So you got a lot going on here. How do you feel safe? Boy, I think as we were first going through this, my instinct, let me see if I can speak to a couple of things here. There have been times when I'm working with a couple, and sometimes we'll get to a place where so in this case, your partner who's struggling with addiction is kind of like plateaued and doesn't seem to be making any progress beyond what they have done. And sometimes I will challenge a spouse and say, hey, we need to consider, what if this is as far as he's willing to go? Are you able or willing to stay in the relationship like this? And what boundaries do you have in order to stay in a relationship like this? So if it's, well, I can stay in this relationship but I'm not living in the same bedroom. Well, if that's your need, then you're going to assert that, but you can't determine how he is going to respond. He might say, if we're not living in the same bedroom, then I'm out. Well, if that's your need and he's not willing to meet your needs, then you've reached this really ugly impasse. But I guess my question would be more of, it doesn't sound like it almost sounds like he's at a plateau and he's not willing to take it beyond the level of vulnerability that is currently there. And so that really might be my challenge to you, is to consider, if this is where we're at, am I okay with this? And I've seen plenty of people stay in a relationship that I might consider, well, I don't think anybody considers it ideal, but they say, I'm okay with this because for whatever reason, I can live with this. Life's easier. We enjoy the grandkids together, and this is just the life we have. I don't know that I have a lot of judgment when that happens. There's so many circumstances why that might be the case. But I think when you talk about what boundaries should I have put in place, I'm going to go back to, if you were to change the word boundaries to needs, what needs should I put in place? What is really I would encourage you to start exploring, what are your needs? In order to feel safe, one person might say, hey, don't be in the bathroom when I'm showering, and that's my need. Right? I'm not going to even call it a boundary. This is my need. This is a non-negotiable in my relationship with where you're at currently in recovery. I'm not comfortable showering or being naked in front of you. Okay, that might be your need. If you're trying to create a boundary to hope that he will somehow change, we don't call those boundaries. You need to focus on what your needs are, and your boundaries will come as a result of your needs. Now, if you're anything like me, it's hard to know what your needs are. You're exploring all the time what your needs are. You're creating boundaries to try and honor your need, and then you realize, well, maybe I didn't actually need that boundary. I actually needed this one. So I would really encourage you, focus on figuring out what your needs are. Focus on, for lack of a better way of saying it, experimenting with your boundaries to discover your needs. And I think you'll start to figure out what safety looks like for you, or you'll get to an end place where you peacefully can say to yourself, you know what, I've given it everything I know how to give, and I've got to move on with my life. And I imagine, honestly, part of what I'm telling you is not helping you feel any less petrified, hurt, or sad. But I honor you for asking the question, and please ask me more questions on this if that's helpful.
Yeah, there is a follow-up. She wants to know if his behavior is sobriety behavior or sober behavior.
Oh boy. So here's the hard part, right? Like, if we get too caught up in what is sobriety, like, for instance, if we get caught up on, well, what's your sobriety date? I'm sometimes more interested in, what does your vulnerability look like? What does your authenticity look like, than I am more concerned with, what date do you have sobriety? Because I've seen people who have been sober for years and they're jerks. And so, like, to be honest with you, there's plenty of people I've worked with who are struggling with addiction, who I've seen them humbly struggling every day, maybe even having a slip every day. And I'd much rather be with be around the person who's humbly struggling through, who's contrite and trying to figure out how to reach out and get support, than I would with somebody who's arrogant and says, well, I'm sober, I don't know what your problem is. Because guess what? You may be sober from the original problem, but you're a jerk. So I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to be rude. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the answer that I was going to give, is he may or may not be sober, but his behavior is horrible. I mean, he's got a history of cheating on you, yet he won't be transparent or honest, or, go to marriage counseling. If he was my
Yeah.
sponsee, I'd be reading him the riot act. It's like, if you want to be in this relationship, you need to be in it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
Um,
tough one. I mean, honestly, you're in a rough spot there. And my heart hurts for you, honestly.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I read this question and I just felt so bad. I mean, my abandonment wounds are poked every day. Oh my God, I just feel so much pain there.
Oh, totally.
Um,
Totally. Hmm.
yeah. Here's another follow-up. I like this. The common enemy community has kept me away for longer from my relation. Thank you for your validation. I felt so confused for a while, questioning myself if I was doing the right thing. I wanted to reconcile, but that whole thing.
Oh yeah. You know what? It is so often that I'm working with a group of partners. In my case, with a lot of female partners, big partners. And it's interesting to me how often I'll hear a woman say, I feel bad because I'm staying with my husband. I feel bad because my husband isn't entirely sober, and maybe isn't even super active in recovery, but I love him and I feel like it's the right thing to stay with him. And I think, what? I mean, I get it, right? I get why you feel bad. You're in a group of other people. Sometimes, if a woman has had to figure out how to become empowered and have her own voice, or a man for that matter, figuring out how to be empowered and have their own voice, it's often this hoorah, I can do this on my own. And I want to be careful, because the reality is, I don't think there's any, I don't shame anyone. I don't blame anyone. Even if your partner's never going to get clean from their addiction, I don't blame you for staying with them. You love them. You have hope. You're hoping they're going to figure out some way to get healthy, that something's going to come along and knock them, into sensibility. And so good for you for sticking with it and fighting out fighting for the relationship. I think that's noble, right? I don't blame somebody else who decides to leave. I get that. But good for you for doing what you feel is right. And I don't think there's any shame in that whatsoever. So good job.
Yeah, we always tell betrayed partners, search for non-judgmental support.
Yeah.
Somebody who's going to support what you want, regardless of what you want. So I love this next question. This is from another couple that's listening together. So I want to make that point that out up front. 2 years post-discovery, I've been through multiple rounds of disclosure with her. Due to mistrust I have generated due to my actions. She refuses to believe me and repeats the same questions. I offered to write down my responses to the current request for answers so that she can have a written reference. After that, I want to do the remainder of any further disclosure she requests in a therapeutic setting. Is this request reasonable?
Um, if I'm so there's a part of me that I don't know that I fully understand the question. So
They haven't done a formal disclosure yet, so she's getting it piecemeal and she's asking the same questions over and over, which I think is
okay. I guess
trauma reaction.
the place I think where I'm getting caught up is, you said 2 years post discovery, and so and multiple rounds of disclosure. So in my mind, I think I automatically just went to, you've had therapeutic disclosure, but
I think it's the death by paper cut disclosure.
yes, death by 1,000 cuts disclosure. That's the worst.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to say it's the worst. It's terrible.
it's awful.
There's lots of bad ones. Drive-by disclosures are bad. There's lots of bad ones. So, okay. So what I usually encourage when I'm working with a partner or I'm working with somebody struggling with addiction is that she has a right to have all of her questions answered. Absolutely. But what I encourage her to do is to write them all down. And what I tend to encourage my clients to do if I'm working with somebody with the addiction is that I will encourage them oftentimes we do like a chronological disclosure, and there's several ways to do that. You can do it in a narrative form. You can kind of do it in a bullet point form. And a lot of times that is so helpful to do that chronological disclosure because, and I tell them, I want you to start with your earliest memory of this issue. and whether it's sex, alcohol, drugs, whatever, right? And so like, and then I'll also tell them if there's a lot of lying that's occurred in the relationship and in their life, which usually there is, I'll say, I want you to write down your earliest memories of lying and any lying or deception or withholding information, right, throughout your entire life. Include that as part of the disclosure so that in this case, she gets a really good picture of your whole history. And if your first history starts with, I remember seeing my dad come out of the shower naked when I was 5, okay, put that down. You know, I remember walking in on my parents being sexual. Okay, put that down, right? And then chronologically go through everything that's ever occurred. So you're going to do this with your therapist because your therapist is going to say, hey, you have too many details here that aren't helpful. But they're also going to challenge you and say, hey, let's assume here for a second it's like a sexual addiction issue. They're going to say, how many times did that happen? How often did, you know, how many times? What was the frequency? And then I'll tell them, put like no more than 3 times a week or no more than 15 times total. So you're getting very thorough in your disclosure. And then I'm working with a partner on, hey, why do you need this question answered? So I'll give you a classic example. If you have a spouse who has an affair, but it isn't with somebody that she's ever met or he's ever met for that instance, they're oftentimes sharing the name of that person cannot be helpful because now everybody with that name, it becomes a trigger. Now, what I will encourage is that I will tell the partner, if you need to ask this question, I will let you. Even if I think it's going to be traumatizing, I will let you because I don't want to be another person that's going to prevent you from having a voice. And so I think a therapeutic disclosure is so helpful with this. And I would encourage you writing down answers, her writing down questions, and then using therapists to help you guys make that the best disclosure possible. And I have become a fan of a post-disclosure polygraph. Sometimes I've actually said that a pre-disclosure polygraph and a post-disclosure polygraph can be helpful. And it's just a tool. A polygraph is not the end-all be-all. It's not necessarily perfect, but it's one more thing you're using just to try and make sure that I'm going to be honest. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, it's there's some follow-ups here, but I think the answer boils down to talk to a therapist about formal therapeutic disclosure, because this is a process, not an event, and it sounds like it needs to happen, so that the two of you can start at, you know, ground zero where you both know the truth and can work on honesty moving forward. So
absolutely.
We did have one little request in the chat feature, and this is going to have to be our last thing. We're already over. Could you repeat what you said about repair coming from conflict?
Okay, so I you know, it's funny. This statement has kind of evolved for me. I remember originally I used to tell people that attachment is born in conflict, and I remember having somebody say to me, that seems absurd. And then they were, and it was a therapist who I love, who I work with all the time. It's her name's Brittany. And she goes, I think you mean the repair of conflict. And I'm like, well, of course, that's what I mean, right? And I realized, okay, I got to change that, because if you think about like a baby, when a baby's born, it doesn't know how to communicate. So what does it do when it poops or is hungry? It cries. And what do? We don't like crying babies. It doesn't sound good. It grates on us. In fact, there's even research to show that there's chemicals released in our brain, especially in women, that wake them up in the middle of the night, right? So we learn as babies that if we have a conflict and we voice it, I should say, if we're in a healthy situation, we learn if we have conflict and we voice it, repair comes and we gain attachment to that person who repairs our conflict. So throughout life, anytime we have a conflict, we vocalize it to somebody else. And if they show up and if they repair, or even if they do their best to show up and they do their best to repair, we go, oh, this person cares about me. I feel more at peace. It's not as much about the specific issue of the conflict as it is of the person who loves us so much they're attempting to repair. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more clarity on what I'm suggesting, because as adults, our needs don't go away because we become adults, right? I remember thinking as a kid, man, I'm so excited to become an adult because then I can drive and I can have a job and earn my own money and then I won't have any problems. And I realized, wow, actually, the older I get, the more problems there are, the more possibilities of problems. And therefore, the more I need attachment repair, the more I need people in my life who can show me. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. Next week, we'll have Kim Buck at this time, and 2 weeks from now, Matt will be back. So store your questions up, and we'll be happy to answer them. Anything else, Matt?
That's all I got. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys showing up. The fact that you guys are showing up together to this makes me so happy. And hopefully I was able to honor everybody in this, because I'm proud of you guys for making it work, figuring it out.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right. So we'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
See you then.